welcome to episode 1 of Urban Maestras Rising.
Hi, I'm Jackie.
And I'm Jazz.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about us as a podcast hosts together, and then we'll go and talk about ourselves for a little bit, and then the purpose of our podcast.
It's adapted from the public narrative framework by Marshall Gans of Harvard University. And so we're specifically calling it the adapted version because we kind of turn it into our own thing.
Yeah, so if you ever want to look into that, go for it. All right. So I'm Jackie, and my pronouns are she, her, and ella. I identify as a Latina, an American-born Latina, and I'm a bilingual teacher, a bilingual educator, and what else? I think that's it. Oh, I'm first generation. That's another very important label for me and identity. And yeah, Jazza.
Hi, my name is Jazz. My pronouns are she, her, ella. In terms of my identities, because we are really focusing as Brown educators on the intersectionality of our identities. I am an Afro-Latina. My nationality is Dominican American. I'm a daughter, an educator, a bilingual educator at that, and a person that's striving to become more of an anti-racist educator.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the same boat with Jasmine as far as it comes to doing the anti-racist work as an educator. So that's kind of like what brought us together to kind of just start this podcast and voice the different voices that aren't heard and experiences and perspectives from our cultures. Is Jasmine identifies herself as Dominican American, and my parents are Salvadorian. So we both have a different but yet similar experience, especially me coming from a single parent home and being first generation.
Yes, and it's interesting because Jackie, we know each other through work. She came to our school last year, and her and I really connected when we attended the Absence of the Black Educator, which was an event that stemmed from another group we're involved in outside of school called Culturally Conscious Educators Rising, that does that work of creating more anti-racist educators. But we connected that day because of that commonality of being Brown teachers in a predominantly white field of educators, right? We know that 80% of educators are in public schools are white, and we're the minority. Like less than 10% of public school teachers are Latino. So
yeah, and we were both also like born and raised in New York City, so that also gives a very interesting and unique perspective of what it's like to grow up in New York City in school and like most of your teachers being white. So we're gonna talk next about ourselves individually, and like some things that we're gonna answer are like what were our challenges, if we ever had to make a choice, where did we get the courage to make the choice, and where did we get the hope to do it, or if we didn't, and how do we feel, and then the outcomes of making those choices and the outcomes of those challenges and how we navigated them and what all those experiences taught us. So do you want me to go first?
yes.
Okay. Alrighty. So born and raised in New York City. I lived uptown in Dykeman. Woo woo. Till I was about 10. And then I moved to the Bronx. So literally, I've gone to public school my entire life, even undergrad and grad school. So I grew up in basically all the neighborhoods I grew up in were predominantly Caribbean culture. So I grew up with mostly Dominicans in Dykeman. And then when I moved to the Bronx, I was around mostly Puerto Ricans, Guyanese, definitely Black And as I think in high school, it's when I kind of went back to like being more around Dominicans, because we were different neighborhoods were being mixed into in high school. So my challenges going to school in New York City. Of course, I am first generation. My mom's a single mom from El Salvador. Uh, she went to school until she was 11 because there wasn't enough money, and they needed her to work. So she had to stop going to school. And because of that, like education wasn't free when she was growing up. She like shared stories where she like shared notebooks with a neighbor that lived nearby her. So if they were in the same grade, in the same class, and they lived close to each other, they were like kind of go half and half on their school supplies. Um, and yeah, my dad, I think he stopped going to school when he was 9, because he was a male, so he's like uh he was needed more at home, so he did like a lot of the fishing, and like he lived by the by the playa by the beach. So he did more like the handiwork, sorry. So my mom was like very like, you gotta go to school. School's the only thing that's gonna get you out of this. I came to this country to like have a better future for you guys. And education is free here. So to her, it was like, it was a gold mine, like I'm American born, I know English, I I get to go to school for free. So like for her, everything was already, the path was already like built for me. So I kind of had to navigate everything on my own, and that was like, it's always challenging when you're kind of being like the pioneer in the family. Uh, Choices. I don't know. Like everything I did was just go to school, education, and like that was always like my number one priority, and it still is. I definitely, because I am an educator now, but I think the biggest choice I made in educate when it came to my schooling was when I decided to go away for college. And I think I'm the only one in the family that has done it thus far, because I have 3 younger siblings and everyone has gone to college. The baby right now is in her second year of college, but I'm the only one that went away, and that was kind of like, nah. I didn't, nothing that I did was like, the norm. So that was like my first personal choice. I was like, no, like I am gonna go to school, but I'm gonna go to the school that I want to go to. And it was hard because like I was upstate on my own, but the education opportunity program was super, super helpful in the sense that they provided the emotional support that I needed, because they did have a lot of first generation students. So I had a very close relationship with my advisor, who ended up being my like work study boss, who ended up getting promoted to director of the program. So like, now I have this major connection with someone that like literally like nurtured me in the simplest ways, checking up on me every semester. Like even till this day, like, we'll like call each other for our birthdays or like check in. And I think that's something that not everyone can say about their college experience, especially with the EOP program. If I'm not mistaken, probably, I don't know, but back in the day it was like one of the top education opportunity programs, EOP, in the state for the retention rate that they had. And outcomes. So even though I struggled and school was very hard for me to figure out on my own, I'm proud of everything that I've done and have progressed through, because I know there's another kid out there with the same experience, and I could turn around and tell that kid or that family, hey, it's okay. Like I struggled, I get it, and it's gonna be okay, and you can do it. If you need any supports or resources, I can actually provide those for them. And something that I didn't have. So like my purpose as an educator is to be the educator that I would have wanted to have growing up. So that kind of goes into like why I went into education. And this is, becoming an educator was definitely influenced by my experience going to school growing up.
That's powerful.
Thank you.
So my experience, I was born and raised in Washington Heights, one of four siblings. I am technically the middle child because my older brother, I guess in Latin American cultures, a lot of times like the boys are not that involved in the family setting. They're more allowed to like go out and do things. So I'm like the middle child of the girls. And in being so, I would say that I pretty much lived up to the middle child expectations of being the rebellious one, the one that would always get in trouble. And part of my trouble was that I was, after my dad was incarcerated and sentenced to more than 10 years, I had a really difficult time. And I was like, I wasn't getting love in the ways that maybe I needed at the time, or I didn't understand the situation. And therefore I would find myself like trying to get a boyfriend in school. And it was weird because it was like kindergarten. And I would be like the initiator of weird situations, to the point that I was constantly being called into the principal's office. And even in terms of like, I used to write a lot of poetry when I was younger, when I was like around that age, kindergarten to second grade. And one of the first poems I wrote was more like a song, and it was about being in a situation where a man was like married and lusting over that person. So I was really grappling with things that, there wasn't a history of necessarily sexual abuse, but my need for love wasn't being addressed. And so it came out in that manner. And the way that my mom, as an immigrant that didn't necessarily speak the language, the way she navigated it was moving me from school. She thought that maybe it was the groups that I was getting myself involved with. And so I went to about 5 or 6 different schools in Washington Heights, one of which in 5th grade was a parochial school, because I think at that point it had really gotten bad. Like, I think in 4th grade, I was like making out with kids in front of the substitute, like no shame. So she did send me to parochial school. And I feel like that year, because I guess religion was intertwined in the curriculum, I almost had like an audible click where things made sense to me. School wasn't easy for me before that. I finally reached grade level expectations in reading in 4th grade. I couldn't read. That was a huge frustration for me. And to the point where I was almost labeled special education because I couldn't handle the language demands. Like, I couldn't learn English properly and according to standards. And so in 5th grade, things just clicked for me. I was in gymnastics through a free program, but they had recruited me to be part of their national team that competed nationally, and went on to the Junior Olympics with them. And so I think that sense of being a part of a group and also like receiving that religious instruction helped me to like better find my voice. I ended up getting really good grades in 5th grade and being like top of my class, because at that point, in parochial schools, they would rank you. Like, you would know that you're number 3 or number 4 in the class. And I think I made it up to being number 2 or 3. So I was really accelerating. But then my mother couldn't afford it. She was a single parent with 4 children. She had always had aspirations of like being a secretary, but without a good command of the language, that wasn't possible. So we struggled for a while. And so my dream of continuing and like becoming the best, being number 1, rated number 1 at that school, sort of ended abruptly because we couldn't afford it. And so it was back to going to public school, which I'm a full-on public school advocate. But it was back to going to public school. And at that time in Washington Heights in the 90s, public schools were super overcrowded and they couldn't find a space for me, even though my mom had like gone in July and August to try to get me a spot in like a 6th grade program. It wasn't happening. And we would go to the superintendent's office. I know that, at least my mom knew how to advocate for me, and like she would go to the superintendent's office and check in and see when they would be able to accept me. But they didn't get a chance to accept me until like October, late October, November. And when I get to 6th grade, I am placed in an English language learner class. And at this point, the school was tracked. And so they had like 601, 602 being the excellent academy, or the kids that were gifted. And then they had everything down to 13 which had to do more with language and students that needed that additional support. I was placed in like 610. And I remember thinking to myself and feeling empowered now that I had kind of found my niche in school, and I knew that I was like a dancer, gymnast, because I was doing rhythmic gymnastics. So I had that sense of identity. I found myself in a class where students were struggling. And I remember voicing it to one of my teachers. I'm going to call her Miss S. I kind of pulled her to the side at one point and I told her, hey, I feel like this is a bit too easy for me. I feel like I learned this in 5th grade. And that was one of the first times that in my experience in education, I was ripped apart. Like, she's like, who do you think you are? How dare you speak like less of these students when you just got here? Like, how dare you? But in reality, like my grades, I was acing everything. It was like, there wasn't that sense of differentiation that was necessary. And I remember, thank God for let's call him Mr. J. I don't want to give out people's names, but Mr. J, which happened to be a Black teacher, I spoke to him and I told him what happened with Miss S. And he say anything in particular about Miss S, but he did support me in the sense that he was like, okay, I do see that your grades are high and I want to see like what you're capable of doing. So we're going to keep an eye on you. And if that is the case, we'll transfer you to another class. And I was transferred to 603E, the Excellent Academy for like the gifted students. And I did really well to the point that Mr. J ended up writing me a recommendation to Mott Hall, a gifted and talented school. And I remember during my time at Mott Hall and being with students that were considered gifted and talented, and also given that school's for science and math and technology. So getting that first taste of STEM and feeling the privilege of like, we were like one of the first schools in the city to have one-to-one devices for students, and like having that sense of pride and like learning with my IBM and creating spreadsheets and doing all these things that really I felt like I didn't have access to before. So I was super empowered in 7th grade, and I really felt like I found my place where I could just like do my thing and learn. And I think that's really what fostered like that sense of wanting to do better and being a lifelong learner. But really, I feel like my story was made a bit easier because I am like the middle girl, because my sister first went to Mott Hall. And so I was striving for Mott Hall back in 5th grade when I was doing great in school, because I saw that she was making so much progress and because I saw that she was given all these opportunities. So I knew what to look forward to. I knew a bit, because of her experience, how to navigate the system. And I don't feel like that is necessarily something that students are told like how to do. Like, and I'm thinking, because my sister and I followed a similar trajectory in terms of going to Mott Hall, then Manhattan Center, then Barnard College, where her biggest advice to me, and we never got along, my sister and I, complete like oil and water. She was super studious. I was the rebel, always getting in trouble, always doing little schemes on the side. But her biggest advice to me was advocate for yourself. If you see that there's something wrong in your program, get to know the people in the programming office, go in there, talk, get into the classes you need to get into. And she didn't have to say anything else. That was my whole experience. All 4 years, I was constantly advocating for myself in the programming office. And teachers, I don't know what it was, teachers just wouldn't give me a recommendation for like honors classes or AP classes, even though my grades were good enough. And so I would have to work on building that relationship with teachers and like asking them specifically, like, hey, I got a 95 on the Regents, I got this, can you please place me in an honors class? And when I would tell them, it's like, oh, okay, I'll place you. But it's like, why did I have to tell you something where clearly my data is showing you that I'm capable? So that to me was always like mind boggling, but then it empowered me even more to like really go out there and try my best to be acknowledged in that sense, because I did want to be in that position where I'm learning the most that I can and getting credit for it. Yeah. And then when I applied for Barnard, I remember the backlash from the teachers, like just gawking at me, like you're not gonna get in. It's like, wow. I think I applied to Columbia, NYU, and Barnard, and they were like, Like you're setting your sights way too high, like even though you have good grades. But I was able to get in because, as I mentioned, my sister was part of the HEOP program, and a lot of times they acknowledge that legacy. And so,
And
and I have grades for it.
HEOP for the listeners is like the same thing as EOP, but HEOP is Higher Educational Opportunity Program, which is for private schools, and EOP is for public schools. So sorry.
No, it's okay. So I got into Barnard through HEOP. I think that brings me just to the idea of why I'm an educator now. It's because I do feel that I want students to feel the way I feel when I had my audible click of like knowing that education is a right that I deserve. And I want students to feel empowered because self-actualization is a thing that I feel like it's a big part of the immigrant experience of like coming to a different country and feeling like they want to make not even necessarily a name for themselves, but they want to be successful and they want to prosper for their family. And there are ways to do that. But oftentimes in the way that the system is right now, and that brings us to like why we're doing this and why we're here, the way the system is right now, it's not that simple to navigate. And we want all kids of all types of intersectionality to be able to thrive and really find their voice. Like I've never believed that when people say, not everyone's built to go to college. I'm like, then we need to fix the system because
right.
Everyone has that intrinsic desire to learn and to be great at something and to follow their passion. And so we're not doing right then if we're turning people off.
Yeah, and I want to mention, I thank you for sharing all of that. I like learned some new things about you just now. But I think it was very powerful for your sister to turn around and tell you, go advocate for yourself instead of taking that burden herself. Because I know I did that as the oldest, kind of like, oh, let me go fix this or let me go help them instead of like telling them, do this, do that. I think that was also very powerful of her not to like carry all of it on her own. And, you know, like, I also find it very powerful that you went ahead and you did it, you know. But my parents, well, my mom, like the way they saw it is, you know, school is the privilege. You follow every single order, every rule, and you'll do fine. You'll be successful. And it was kind of like they were the authority. So I had a really hard time voicing anything to teachers because of that. Because I was like, no, I'm just gonna follow rules. I'm just gonna, you know, they know what they're doing, and you know, I have to, if they say A plus B is this, I'm gonna follow exactly that. And that's not necessarily true. You know, teachers are human. It is very important for students to advocate for themselves in any setting. I think that's really something that I find that is very necessary and something that I like to embrace in the classroom. And yeah, so going back to just the reason behind our podcast and like the name, for example.
So our name is absolutely an act of rebellion. Urban Maestras Rising, the fact that we are using Spanglish, what a lot of people refer to as Spanglish, how that's not appropriate, especially in a school setting. Like, how dare you? So we wanted to embrace the fact that we grew up, we're born in an urban community. We are teachers, and the rising aspect has to do with the fact that we want to do better continuously. And in doing better, it not only means learning and unlearning white supremacy, but also bringing our students with us as we go.
Mm-hmm. And including our community in this process, and, you know, encouraging everyone else to do the same. Because this is all a process. The whole learning and then unlearning all the bad stuff is a lifelong process. And, you know, Jasmine talked a little bit about this, our Spanglish name, right? It's always been frowned upon to mix two languages. And just to cut it short for you, it's because they don't want to mix English or any other language, like not taint it. And sorry to say, but as you know, a Latina that's American born, this is part of me, intertwining. And there's like this this is guru in bilingual education called Ophelia Garcia, and like very recent, which was in the education world, this is recent, like in 2005 14 or 15, she came out with a book that she wrote with somebody else, talking about translanguaging, and that's it, basically like the umbrella of code switching and Spanglish, and she legitimized this concept of it being okay to do in the school setting, and she basically made it a professional. You know, like she made it academic with her research, and there's a lot of research that shows that being able to throw in two languages within a sentence just shows how your brain is constantly using both. So it doesn't show a lack of one language. It just shows that you're not separating, that you're continuously using both of them.
And also, studies have shown that people that do speak Spanglish or translanguage have higher cognitive levels, because the placement of certain languages is very strategic. It is intended to evoke certain types of emotion. So very similar to like this, what studies have shown about African American vernacular English, where the rules, the grammar, even make more sense than actual English. So there is value in that.
Yeah, we'll have a whole episode on bilingual education and all these concepts, and we'll get into more depth with it. But we're gonna try to keep our episodes pretty short, not make them like hour long. We want to keep them under 20 minutes at least, 15 to 20 minutes. But yeah, the purpose of our podcast.
We are brown educators who were born and raised in New York City and want to hold space for conversations centered on educating Black and brown students. What we mean by educating Black and brown students, we're encompassing the whole community. So parents, teachers, allies, everyone's included in this conversation. So really, we want to inspire even more conversations and to have others hold space and engage in transformative conversations with the hope that it'll lead to action and it'll lead to reform in education.
Amen to that. So when we are closing out on our episodes, we will basically offer some next steps for our community of listeners. So today, our next steps for our community is talking about the importance of the census. If you have not completed the census, it is not too late. You can do it online. According to Title 13 of the U.S. Code, they're not allowed to disclose any of the information that you provide on the census. So, you know, if you know any family members that fear, or anybody that fears that their information will be disclosed to other agencies, organizations, and etc., they can't, according to law. It is very important because based on the numbers in the census comes our budgeting and the money that we get for our neighborhoods, schooling, other organizations that serve the community. So we don't have, if we, you know, we don't have the correct numbers, the correct statistics, then our monies and our budget is going to go to the wrong people.
Right. And we know that the census occurs every 10 years. And so we're talking about a child going through, if they're not accounted for, like a baby, going through most of their elementary schooling without that necessary funding. And thinking about funding and politics in that sense, that also brings us to voting. And please, if you're not registered, register to vote at vote.gov. And keep in mind, the Democratic Convention is August 17th through the 20th. The Republican Convention is August 24th through the 27th. Please, let's do our part.
Yep. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and listen to us talk about our, you know, stories of ourselves and the purpose of our podcast. We look forward to hearing from you in the comments. We love to hear feedback. And let's keep these very needed but important conversations going. Ciao.
Goodbye.